What's good, YouTube? Menasteel here. And if you play Pokemon Pocket, there's a good chance you either heard of or participated in the tournament scene. And if you have, it's even more likely that you've heard about the Ursiiday weeklies, as it's a weekly tournament that not only draws in over 1,000 players every weekend, but it's one of the few tournaments that actually offer a cash prizing, making it that much more enticing to participate in. So before I go any further, I would like to thank Ursi for using her platform and giving the community a competitive setting that in numbers alone rivals some of the biggest TCGs in the world. And although it's very unlikely that you're watching this video and don't know who she is, I will be linking their YouTube and Twitch down below, so feel free to check it out, as well as their Discord if you want to keep up to date with their announcements and potentially compete in one of their future tournaments. So as to what led me to make this video in the first place is that for the first time I was actually able to participate in one of these Ursi weeklies, and although I didn't perform as I would like to and missed Top Cut, I was still mind blown by how efficiently run such a large scale tournament was. So once again, I would like to thank Ursi as well as her team of admins and judges that made such a large scale tournament possible, as well as give them credit as all the information you'll see in this video comes from their most recent tournament. And speaking of tournament, it's hard to bring up the Pokemon Pocket tournament scene without bringing up Limitless TCG. Although I don't know who's behind the website, the fact that this website is running tournaments at all times and is capable of supporting tournaments as large as these is something I never really thought was possible. I'll also link Limitless down below, as they allow the community to create tournaments at all times of all shapes and sizes. And I'd urge y'all, if you're even slightly interested, to check it out, as most tournaments, including the Ursiiday weeklies, are free entry, and it truly adds an extra level of competitiveness and energy that is currently missing from Pokemon Pocket directly. Either way, I can't wait to talk about the deck that won this tournament. As you can see from the title, it's actually Darkrai Weavile, which I could honestly say I don't think anybody expected. But before just looking at the winner, I wanted to break down the entire metagame as a whole. So if you enjoy videos like this, as well as expert solo battle guides and general deck breakdowns and gameplay, please consider liking and subscribing, as I do videos on all that and more. But above all else, stay pro. So when looking at the metagame, I'd like to point out that this tournament had a total of 1,353 players. Thus, the tournament consisted of 10 rounds and cut to top 64. But before jumping into top cut, I want to break down what made up the 1,300 players. As you can see from the diagram, Arceus Dialga decks, unsurprisingly, made a quarter of the playing field, followed by the second most played deck being Rampardos, that totaled the 8th of the player pool. From there, the representation of decks fell, as only 5 decks represented more than 2% of the player base. Those being Gallade, Palkia with Origin Form, Gyarados with Origin Form, and both variants of 18 trainers, which funny enough received an even split, as there was 37 Articuno 18 trainers and 37 Palkia 18 trainers. Thus, I use the same slice of the chart to represent them. However, as we move forward, one variant did rise above the other. But when looking at the 42% that's considered other, I'd be sitting here all day listing the variety of one-off decks that come in a 1,300 player tournament. So if I had to point out something that stood out to me personally, was the increase in Gyarados and Gallade. As if you would have asked me what the top 3 decks and most played decks in the metagame would be Dialga Arceus, Rampardos, and Palkia with the Origin Form. Jumping into top 64, we see the Rampardos takeover, as it jumped from being an 8th of the player base all the way up to almost a 3rd. Meanwhile, Arceus Dialga did drop from the number 1 spot, but however maintained its ground in terms of percentages, with only a slight decrease. However, it's clear to see that fighting decks continue to rise in this format, as Gallade jumped from just below 5% to a 5th of the top cut. And at face value, the numbers don't lie, and we have a clear top 3 in this format, or at least in this tournament specifically, in the form of Rampardos, Dialga Arceus, and Gallade EX. Trumping my personal belief that Palkia with Manaphy and Origin Form were the clear number 3. As you can see, they basically just maintained their 5% and only had 3 decks representing them in top 64. The rest of top 64 is littered of all types of strategies, and honestly, looking at the top 32 didn't make it much clearer, and it wasn't until top 16 that you were clearly able to see what the dark horses and real threats to the crown were among the many. Now looking at top 16, the picture doesn't change much, as we see that the top 3 decks continue to dominate as they make up 75% of what's left in the tournament, with Rampardos clearly in the lead as it makes up more than 1/3 of what's left. However, now we get a clearer picture of what's making up the other pile, or at least was a true competitor for this tournament, as the decks challenging the top 3 are Palkia with Manaphy and Origin Form, which I personally thought was going to do a lot better. There's Articuno 18 Trainer, which ultimately proved to be more effective, at least in this tournament, over the Palkia 18 Trainer, as 2 different variants made it to top 64, while 0 of the Palkia made it. And here in top 16, we see one that's still fighting. And then the last 2 decks are where I love making these breakdowns, as I look forward to making separate videos on both the Weavile Darkrai, which spoiler alert due to the title we are aware wins, and the Carnivine Arceus deck, which honestly if there's a rise in Darkrai decks, might actually see even further success after this tournament. And when I looked into top 8, all that really happened was that the top 3 got slashed, as the Rampardos decks dropped to only 3, Arceus to 2, and Gallade was ultimately eliminated, which left us with the top 4 of Weavile Darkrai, 2 Arceus Dialga decks, and an 18 Trainer Articuno. Shout out to Stis, or Sties, not sure how to pronounce it, but congratulations on the victory, with a deck that was barely on anybody's radar, if at all. However, I would like to recognize Dialga Arceus decks, as despite the rise in fighting decks that clearly counter it, its consistency and power still managed to overcome the increasing adversity, as the deck continues to put up numbers, and although it fell short in this tournament, it clearly continues to be one of, if not the best deck in the game. Last but not least, shout out to the 18 Trainer Articuno deck, that although it's been a deck since the beginning of Genetic Apex, with every set continues to get more support and is further expanded upon. And if you would like to see gameplay on 18 Trainer Articuno, I do have a video of my own, as it is the deck that got me my 5-game win streak. However, I do find it interesting that this player decided to play Redcar over Mars, and it's definitely something I'll be willing to try out in the future. But enough about 2nd through 4th, let's get right into the winner's deck. When looking at the winner's deck, 3 things stand out to me immediately. One is that there's not a single Triumphant Light card in this deck, which in theory means you could have played this deck card for card last format. However, it is the change in format that allows this specific build to be successful. The second thing that stands out is the fact that they're not playing a 5th or 6th basic in this list. It was standard for these decks to play some number of Farfetch or Spiritomb, as they either added to the aggression, or in the case of Spiritomb, they also enabled Cyrus. Another card that's missing from the standard builds of the past is Dawn, as they opted to play cards like Mars and Potion. However, as I wasn't the pilot, all I could assume is that removing cute combos like Dawn and additional bodies like Farfetch and Spiritomb allowed the deck to not only be more consistent, but streamline the damage, which in a format like the one we're in that's very aggressive and powerful, I think this player's tunnel vision on consistency and damage is what ultimately led to their victory. However, I could only put so much input, and I do plan on making a video in the coming days where I put this deck to the test on PvP, and thus can give you an educated opinion on the card choices. But for now, nothing tells a better story than looking directly at their tournament run. When looking at the Swiss rounds of the tournament winning deck, it tells a very different story from the one we see in Top Cut, which I will get to. But this Swiss run shows a resilience that not many people have, as losing round 1 against the best deck on paper is not the way anybody wants to start their tournament. As not only did you start on the wrong foot, but later on if it comes down to tiebreakers, an early loss can really tank your score. However, the player in question locked in and they won their next 5 rounds and didn't lose until round 7, where they actually faced the mirror match. And when looking into the mirror matches list, the main difference is that the mirror was actually playing Dawn instead of Mars, and had an additional copy of Sabrina, as whether these changes were essential in the win is beyond me, as I wasn't there, nor is there footage of this matchup. But from round 7 on, this player was in what the card game world calls the bubble, as any further loss would knock them out of Top Cut contention. They managed to consecutively beat 3 fighting decks, including the top dog at this point of the tournament in Rampardos Lucario. And from an outside looking in perspective, when looking at their matchups for all 10 rounds, it's almost as if they couldn't catch a break, as outside of their round 4 matchup with an Infernape Arceus, every matchup was against a deck that's considered meta to some extent. And even the Infernape deck is very powerful, as Infernape is able to knock out Darkrai or Weavile if they don't have a cape attached. However, where this deck really shined was in Top Cut. Where Swiss was a story of perseverance, Top Cut was pure dominance. The Darkrai Weavile player was able to go 2-0 in every round of Top Cut all the way to the finals, where he eventually dropped the game, but it wasn't enough as he ended up winning the best of 3. And honestly, this Top Cut was like the perfect gauntlet to prove that this Darkrai earned his spot at the top. Outside of the top 64 being an off-meta Arceus Magnezone deck, our player literally climbed up the tier list in a gauntlet of 1 Gallade followed by 2 Rampardos Lucarios, and ultimately 2 Dialga Arceuses to claim the crown. Overall, I'd like to congratulate Stis once again for their performance, as they managed to turn a metagame that looked like this, of over 1,300 players, and take the crown with a Darkrai deck that nobody had on their radar. And honestly, as a big fan of Darkrai, I can't wait to try out the deck for myself. And if you're looking forward to see that gameplay, video will be posted very soon, if not already by the time you watch this video. And once again, I'd like to shout out Ursiiday, as these tournaments and this video would not be possible without their platform. I can't wait to see how the meta evolves around the results of this tournament, as well as what will take the crown next time. So if you'd like to see more videos like this one, or gameplay with some of the more interesting decks at these tournaments, please consider liking and subscribing, as there will be a lot more videos where this came from. Hope y'all have a wonderful day, and above all else, stay pro.